Welcome, welcome. You are now tuning into the Positive Deposit Podcast, where we transform minds to change lives. I am your host, Presley Nelson Jr., two-time cancer survivor and proud president of Positive Deposits. And I have one other, yes, clap it up. I have another Howard hero, yes. So anyone that is from Howard University that is a survivor is a part of my Howard hero catalog. So I have none other than Marcus Ware with me today. He is he's a warrior, he's a conqueror, he's a survivor. He's done a lot of good works, and we'll get into that into this interview. But I'm gonna pass it over to you, Marcus, just to give a brief interview, and then we'll jump right into this courageous conversation.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me and inviting me to be on your podcast. I really appreciate, that you have taken what can be a negative experience for a lot of people and have chosen to transform it into a positive experience to really educate and motivate other folks. So I'm really happy to be here. I'll just share a little bit about myself. So I'm originally from Alabama. The only two places I've ever lived are Alabama and DC. I came to DC, as you mentioned, to go to Howard. And
well, before you do it, is it Auburn or is it Clemson?
Oh, it's Alabama, bro. It's
that Tide, okay? The Crimson Tide, okay.
Yeah,
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. But yeah. So, but I'm a big college football fan, so it's funny that you say that because no other team is, they're not touching us. But I had a great experience at Howard, met a lot of good people, was very active on campus, and then decided to stay at Howard to go to law school. Have worked in higher education ever since then. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here and excited to chop it up with you, brother.
Awesome, man. We are on two different spectrums of the frat, but we saying so it's
all right. Cool.
That's all that matters. Cool. That's all that matters. So so talk to us. What was life like before you got the diagnosis?
Yeah, I mean, so for context, I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 33 years old.
Oh wow!
So I had been relatively healthy up until that point, and like most people, stubborn about going to the doctor.
Of course.
But I mean, I did have a good relationship with my primary care physician. And what was interesting is that, before I was diagnosed with cancer, I was going through it for probably about 2 months, right? I knew I was sick.
Okay.
And I'll just give you a couple of examples. So at the time I was working at George Washington University, and I had an office, and the couple of things that I knew was that I was having night sweats. So I would wake up in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what it was about. I just thought I needed to turn the air conditioner up or something, but it continued to happen.
Yeah.
And so I also was very fatigued.
Okay.
And there were times when I was in my office and I would have to go out and tell the front desk, I'm going to close my door for 2 hours. Don't let anybody. And I would literally lay down on the ground in my office and just rest.
Wow.
And so again, I was healthy up until that point. So I was going to my doctor and they were testing me for everything, bro. I had probably 4 or 5 different tests. So I would go to the doctor and, they would test me. I would go back the next week and they would be okay, well, we didn't see anything there. So let me test you for other things.
Right.
While this was happening, I was losing weight rapidly. And I think it had something to do with the fever and the night sweats and just the sickness in my body. But I remember going to the doctor on a Friday, and I remember I looked at the scale and I was 180 pounds. And then I went back the following Tuesday and I was 171 pounds. And, the doctor at that point, I think she knew that something was wrong, but she laughed it off. She said, oh, the scale probably needs to be calibrated. But my clothes started not to fit. So and the moment which really sort of triggered me to go somewhere else was I was walking down the hall at work one day and one of my coworkers was man, whatever you're doing in the gym is working. And I was I ain't been to the gym in a year, so I was let me go figure out what's wrong with me. So
right.
I mean, life up until that point was, I didn't really have that much context about cancer. I didn't, I knew what it was, but like most people, when I heard the word cancer, it was just something that was big and scary.
Yeah.
And And, you know, up until the point where, like, you know, I found out that it was something that I was going to have to face.
Yeah. And I think that's, you know, we don't know what that word really means until we actually go through it, right? You see it on Grey's Anatomy, you see it on all these medical shows, you hear about it, you know, but then you don't realize what life would be like when the doctor gives you the news to you. And so
Right.
when did your doctor, I mean, you said you had a great relationship, but when did the doctor give you that news? How did
Well,
he know?
what was interesting is that, like, my doctor didn't even diagnose my primary care physician did not diagnose me. So,
Wow.
you know, I knew I was sick. I was actually going to try to figure out what was wrong with me. And one day, like 2 months into like this, you know, me being like extremely sick, like all the time, I I did like a virtual visit with a doctor.
Yeah.
Because I took my temperature and I was like 103 degrees. And the doctor asked me what my symptoms were, and by this point I had like a note, an iPhone note that had like all my symptoms in it. So, you know, when the doctor asked me, I shared my symptoms, and the doctor said, you need to go to an emergency room right now. It was flu season, and I
Yeah.
remember the doctor was hesitant about like telling me to go to the hospital with my
Right.
symptoms, and this is before COVID. But you know, after I shared my fever, the doctor was like, you need to go to the hospital and you need to not leave until they tell you what's wrong with you. And
Wow.
a doctor knew based on the symptoms that I shared, like what it could potentially be. But because
Absolutely.
of the virtual visit, like, you know,
Yeah,
she
you
couldn't diagnose
can't
me.
really do much. You got
I
Kaiser?
remember, go ahead.
You got Kaiser?
No. Bro,
Okay.
so it's funny. I was living near campus. I was living near Howard, and I felt so bad, bro. I should have gone to Howard Hospital, but I was like, I'm going to Washington Hospital Center. So I went to the hospital.
Yo, why do we do that to our alma mater, man? We do not we do not respect our hospital.
Well, I was equidistant between Washington Hospital Center and Howard.
Okay.
So
That's fair.
I'm, you know, but and again, at the time I didn't know what was wrong with me. So
Absolutely.
I went to the hospital on March 8th. And they did when I went in, the next day they did a test,
Yeah.
and it came back negative. And so then they had to do it was called a biopsy, as you know.
Yep.
But then they had to do a needle biopsy. So it was the most painful thing I'd experienced up to that point. Like, they took this needle, and it's probably the only point during the entire experience where I cried.
Wow.
But then on March 14th, which is like a week later,
Yeah.
a doctor that I had not been seeing came into the room, and she was like, you know what's wrong with you? It was a very weird way to like find out you have cancer.
Right.
I knew that it was probably something serious, but I did not know it was as serious as cancer. And so
Absolutely.
she kind of like let it out. And I don't think she was supposed to be giving me my official diagnosis, but that's how I found out. Like, the doctor was just, what's wrong with you? And I was like, I have no idea what's wrong with me. That's why I'm here.
So when you heard the diagnosis, how did you feel? You know, what was that feeling? What was the first thought that you had when she said, hey, you know, you have cancer?
Yeah, you know, I'm gonna be honest with you, bro. So I'm a person of faith, right? Like, I have always been someone who has been connected to a higher power.
Absolutely.
The whole time, I was like very calm the whole time. I had a tremendous support system, which is very important. So my best friend was at the hospital with me, and all these people, you know, were coming in and out. But I wasn't really before I knew what the prognosis was, right? Because, you know, one thing that we said about cancer before was that, you know, it's a big word, it's a scary word. But one of the things that I've learned throughout, you know, over the last 3 years is that there are so many different types of cancer.
So many.
And to say, like, you know, that my diagnosis, which is Hodgkins lymphoma, when I actually sat down and got my official diagnosis, you know, I asked the hard questions like, what does this mean? Like, am I going to check out of here soon?
Right.
And, you know, the answer that I got was, you know, because of medical research, you know, this is a very treatable cancer. And obviously it's cancer, so the chemo and the other things that I might go through, like, would definitely have a negative impacts on my body, that it was a very survivable cancer. And then, you know, once I heard that, and the other quick story I'll tell you is that, you know, I was in the hospital the day that I got diagnosed, I told them I wanted to transition to another hospital to get treated.
Yeah.
So my best friend went home that night and bought a book about Hodgkin's lymphoma and came back to the hospital the next day. But I could tell by the way that he reacted to it that I was going to be fine. So,
wow.
and to have, people in, that would do that for me. I mean, and we could talk about that a little bit later, but
yeah, because we're going to touch on that. We're going to touch on the support factor of it. But, the thing that I heard from you is that, one, faith. And so having that strong faith in that relationship with God, you already were grounded and was able to accept the unexpected, because you believe in the higher power. But also one thing that I take away from you, and I did it as well too, is always asking the tough questions, always. Right. And a lot of us, in the Black and brown community, we don't ask the questions. We allow the doctors to tell us what they need to tell us, and then we say, okay, cool, what do I need to take? Right. So it's so important that we do that. But I'm really proud that you really just gave it up to God, and a lot of us, we don't. I'll share with you as well is that when I first found out, it was 2012. It was around CBC, and that's when B. Smith's was up and running. And B. Smith's, and I started to have, and this was not the second diagnosis, which we share that in common, but the first one with large B cell lymphoma, it was like, in the cartoons where you, if you hold the hose and it turns like this. Yeah. Yeah. That's how my head was like feeling. It was like literally like the mass was on top of the veins that allow the blood not to circulate. So here nor there, I literally, once I got to the hospital, they're like, you can't go anywhere, right? The same thing, you can't go anywhere. However, when they told me the diagnosis, the first thing I did was like, well, if God can get me through Howard University, right, through Kappa Alpha Psi, right, through the administration building, and just growing up, this is just another obstacle he'll allow me to navigate through. And I said a prayer, with a good friend, and I had the mentality shifted right then and there. And so I resonate when you talk about faith, because having strong faith is very key, because it's what you cannot see, you know?
Yeah, and if I can say this though,
absolutely.
Bro, people ask me what my response was, and like, I think because of my faith, my response was peace. It wasn't fear, it was anything else. It was peace. Because at the end of the day, like, there's a serenity prayer that says you control the things that you can control, and everything else you got to give it up to God. So like, even if my prognosis was worse than it was, there was little I could do about it at that point, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that is one of the benefits of having faith, is that when you are faced with challenges, your faith dictates how you respond to that challenge. And I think that really sort of like shaped and molded the way that I sort of went through that whole process.
Yeah, man, that's powerful. And so you spoke on that. So how was treatment? You've already got diagnosed. How was treatment for you?
Yeah, let me just go back a little bit, because I appreciate you sharing sort of like for people that are listening that might encounter or like go through this experience one day. My the outside of the other more like not noticeable initially symptoms that I had, there was a mass that formed on my chest. It was, and it literally came out of nowhere. I remember, just like you said, you were at B. Smith's. I was at brunch with my special friend, and I came home, and like I always like rub my chest anyway, but I rubbed my chest, and I was like, okay, something ain't. But to treat, man. So I made a decision, because I was working at GW at the time, George Washington University. My office was right across the street from the treatment center, and so I made the decision to be treated there. One of the interesting things about GW's campus is that obviously it's in a very predominantly white neighborhood. It's predominantly white. But one of the things that was interesting to me was that when I walked into the infusion center, which is where the room where you go to get chemotherapy, almost everybody in the room was Black. And I just really could not understand how,
that's crazy.
Even at a white institution, all the people that were being treated were people that looked like me. And so, I walked into this big room and I don't think there's anything that can like really prepare you for chemo. Because if you think about what it is at its core, it's literally, I went through a treatment called ABPD that where you sit there for 4 or 5 hours, a cocktail of 4 different drugs. And literally what they're doing is they're just like pumping medicine into your body for 4 hours and killing and breaking down these cells. And, part of the process is that they also give you steroids and they give you other medicines because it can be very, very draining.
Absolutely.
And so what was interesting for me was that, so I had 12 treatments and I did not listen to the doctor, which is not good. My mindset throughout the whole thing, because I had a close friend who reached out to me after I was diagnosed, because I made a decision, and we can talk about this later. I made a decision to be public about my diagnosis.
Absolutely.
In part because, my diagnosis happened around my 10-year reunion from Howard. Yeah. And I was diagnosed 2 months before the reunion. And I knew based on like my physical appearance, like I'd already lost weight and I knew I was probably gonna lose my hair. That I had to be honest with people about what was going on. And I also took it as an opportunity to educate folks who, when I posted it, there were so many people that reached out to me and their response was, even though they didn't say it, like, I feel bad that you're gonna die. And my response to all those people was, I will die, not from this.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But I won't die from this. But my treatment, I'm gonna be honest, it was not that bad. I mean, there were definitely days where I did not feel like getting out of the bed. There were days where I just felt drained. And I kind of went through a cycle. Once you do this like a couple of times, there's a cycle that forms, right? I knew after I left chemo, I couldn't taste anything until like the next Wednesday. Like I started to like write everything down. Right. So I got chemo on Friday. I went every 2 weeks. I got chemo on Friday. I knew that weekend and the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the next week, I couldn't taste anything. So my diet shifted as a result of that. Wow. I couldn't drink. Were
you upset about that?
Oh, go ahead.
Were you upset about that?
I said I couldn't drink. I didn't say I did not drink. Okay. I had a glass of wine every now and then. I wasn't like
that's fair. That's fair.
But I'll tell you what happened to me. Like after my first chemo, because I was diagnosed in March. My first chemo was in April. Wow. Our chapter.
Why'd you wait so long?
Well, it was because I transitioned hospitals, and I had to go.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
So the probate was on the day I had my first chemo. So there's a picture of me, literally, I left the hospital and I went to the yard. And everyone was looking at me like, why are you out here? And I was like, look, I can go home and just sit there and not do anything.
Exactly.
And in hindsight, I know there are reasons why doctors tell us to do that, because when we are out in the world, we expose ourselves to, all types of things that could harm our bodies. And when your body is in such a vulnerable state when you're going through chemo, it's just not a good idea for you to put yourself, in those situations. Yeah. But I made a decision at the beginning of my treatment that I was not going to allow it to change, the way that I moved through the world.
That's so powerful, man.
I went out there, with my Band-Aids and, 140 pounds. And I mean, I looked sick. Like I literally had just left the hospital to go. But I did that because I wanted to show people that, you can respond to this in a number of different ways. You can go home. And I'll just wrap this part up by saying this. The best advice I got when I was diagnosed came from a friend from Howard, actually a really close friend. And as you know, Hodgkins lymphoma, when I was diagnosed, they told me it was a rare cancer. Right. But then when I posted, there were probably 6 people the next day that like reached out to me and told me that they had faced the same type of cancer. See? So I don't know how rare this is. Right. But I asked her a question and I said, what has been the most difficult part of this? And she told me her immediate response was, you need to get a therapist if you don't have one. Because you spend so much time sitting in your thoughts. Like, I like you, bro. Like, we're both very outgoing people. Absolutely. I'm people so much, and I get my energy from other folks. Yep. But I was going through treatment, even though, I was out and about, I wasn't working for the first like month or so.
Yeah.
So spending way more time with myself than I normally do. And when you sit in your thoughts, even if you faith, there will be times where your faith is tested and where you don't see, and you are hurting. And for me, like I was going through therapy the entire time. So sometimes I would leave chemo and I would go to therapy. And taking care of your mental and spiritual health while you're going through something like this is probably the most invaluable lesson that I got very early on that really helped me get. So I had to go through 12 treatments. After the 4th treatment, I was in remission. But the thing that the doctor told me was that, even though the cancer was no longer present in my body, the treatment was for the diagnosis, not like, the state of your body. So I had to finish. So at that point I was like, okay, am I done? And they were like, no, got 2 more months of this. So I started in April and I didn't finish until August.
Wow.
But that summer honestly was one of the summers where I grew more spiritually, I think in so many different ways, because when you're tested like that again, like you have to choose how you're going to respond, and I chose to be positive.
How did you grow spiritually? What changed? What was the Marcus before then? Now the Marcus, what platform?
I would say that, I have been very, very fortunate and blessed in my life. Like I grew up and I have faced challenges before, but I had never faced a challenge like that before.
Right.
And I that for me, it really drew me closer to God. Like I knew that I had made it through every other situation that I had that I faced before that. But to know that, after 4 treatments, after being diagnosed with cancer in March, that in May, my doctor called me and told me like the cancer is gone.
Wow.
Bro, I was driving and I had to pull over and I just started to pray. I was just like that like, and this is probably something that you may have experienced too. But I was just like, I don't even understand like why I am worthy of like this type of blessing, right? Like that I had to go through this emotional, it was like an emotional pendulum, because it's like you got cancer at 33 years old, and it's like, man, like then you have to think about all these things that you haven't had to think about before. Like my friend told me, like, you need to plan your funeral, you need to plan, and it was, it sounds morbid, but any of us could be taken out of here in a car accident or
absolutely.
So my initial response to that was, I don't know if I want to do that, but I did a lot of things during that period that I think, a lot of people should do, whether you're faced with cancer or not. But I think my faith grew because it was almost like my own personal miracle. Like I have cancer.
Yeah.
And, when I think about cancer, I know people that have gone through years and years of treatment, treatment didn't work. So they had to try other things. And for me to like go and sit down 4 times, for 4 hours, and that was enough for the cancer to be gone. It just, to me, it was just like my own personal miracle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the part that does suck is that once it, like for my first time, I was done after I had 6 cycles, and I had, mine was really, the chemo treatment that I had was R-CHOP. And R-CHOP is, that's when it's really real. Especially because large B-cell lymphoma is that's a rare one. Now I concur with you, like, and I'm not knocking classic Hodgkins Lymphoma Stage IV. I have a lot of good friends that have come on the show and shared their experience as well. But that R-CHOP was serious. But I was after it's interesting. Yeah, after the 4th treatment, I was good to go. To go. However, just like you were saying, you have to finish the rest. And that right there was like the game changer, because when there's nothing else in your body for the chemicals to melt down and things of that nature, those treatments, those were the worst. And so those are the worst. And actually, you're like, why?
Yeah, like so after they called me and told me I went into remission. That's when, you know, I went back to work. I knew I still had to like finish, but bro, one of the kind of like eye-opening moments for me was,
Yeah.
you know, I made it through the first 4 treatments and my hair did not fall out. And I think the thing that I learned most about me during that period, outside of the spiritual lessons that I learned, was how connected I am to my hair. And, you know, I haven't really cared about my hair that much, I didn't think. But I remember being back at work, probably the first week, and I like sometimes also like I let's play with my beard. And I was in a meeting at work, and I pulled my beard, and like a chunk of hair came out. And I just I like looked at my boss, and I just got up and I left. I was like, I can't do this.
Let me just shave it off. Let me just.
So again, there's a picture of me at my 10-year reunion, and I was completely bald because the hair on my head was actually hanging on. It was my beard that was falling out. But it got to the point where I was just like,
I had to let it go. You had to let it go. You talk a lot about your support system, you know, and how did they show up, man? You know, I know you're a very well-known person that I know, you know, and very character is and integrity is major, and so I always appreciate that about you. And at any time we, you know, interacted, but once you you know, shared and was transparent about your diagnosis, how strong was the support system?
Yeah, bro, I think that was another thing that just like really blew me away, because I know that I have like strong friendships with people, like very deep friendships with people, but there were 6 people in particular that like they all knew each other through me. But they created a group chat, and they scheduled out who was going to be with me at chemo, who was going to take me food, who was going to like, you know, basically like care for me. Like, I mean, they took like weeks, took turns. And, you know, being with someone who is going through, you know, something as serious as chemo, like I know I was more irritable than I normally was. Like I wasn't a pleasant person to be around. And you know, the fact that they stood by me, they made sure I had everything I needed. You know, it really blew me away to, you know, because you know that you expect your friends to be there for you if you need them. But fortunately for a lot of us, like we don't really need our friends to be there for us in the way that my friends were there for me. And so having that support system really helped me get through that entire situation.
No, that's awesome, man. You know, and it's very important you have a support system. But the thing that I learned was that you'll be surprised when you are in this path who shows up and who does not.
And who doesn't, yeah. And one of the things that I had to like get over was like the people that did not reach out to me during the entire period. And like in the beginning, I'm going to be honest with you, I was deeply hurt because there were people that were showing up for me that I was like, why are you here? You know, and then there were people that did not show up that I questioned, like, are you even my friend?
Absolutely.
And I was one person in particular that like, I saw him probably like a year later. And I was like, bro, you know, it really, I was honest with him. I said, you know, it really hurt me that like, you didn't even like text me or call me or didn't come see me. His father had been diagnosed with Hodgkins lymphoma literally 2 weeks before I was.
Wow.
And so it was very difficult for him to accept and process his father's diagnosis. But then this is somebody that I was very close to. When I was diagnosed and announced my diagnosis, it was just too much for him, right? And he actually like went into a depression because he didn't know if he was going to lose like somebody that was close to him and, you know, his father potentially. And so that's one of the things that we have to do. We have to give people grace around us because you never know what people around us are dealing with and how they might be triggered by, you know, things that we're going through. And so, you know, since then, like when negative things happen to me and people, you know, did show up or did not show up, you know, it impacts me less now than it did then because of the experience that I've gone through. I understand that I shouldn't take those things personally because without information, I'm just making an assumption and it's not healthy and helpful.
Yeah, no, I mean, and the good thing is that after you found out, you did give him grace, you know, because at the end of the day, like you never know what someone else is going through too, you know, and so that's amazing. So I'm glad you had a support system. So let's talk about the fun thing that you did with Light the Night, man. When I seen the amount of impact you made to this organization. It was amazing. So how'd you get involved with the LLS and Light the Night?
So it was actually kind of ironic because when after I graduated from Howard, I started working there, and I founded a program that took first year students and really just helped them become leaders on campus and in the community. And one of the projects that I gave them was to identify an organization that they would raise money for, and this was in 2013. So I was diagnosed in 2018. So 5 years before I was diagnosed, the students at Howard that I was working with chose LLS because blood cancers impact Black folks disproportionately than any other portion of the population.
Wow.
So there were a lot of folks who had family members that had leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma. And so in probably the span of a month, we raised $12,000.
Wow.
And the LLS reached out to me because they were like, we've been trying to get college students to raise money for us for the longest time. And we need to know like what you did to get these folks to raise. So we got an award that year.
Oh, wow.
After that, because every year I allowed them to pick the charity or the organization we raised money for. So that was like a one-time thing. But when I was diagnosed 5 years later, the first thing I thought about was this organization that we had raised money for 5 years before.
Yeah.
And the cool part for me was that, I mentioned earlier how I was diagnosed on, May 14th, and I was in remission 2 months later in May. And, when I asked the doctor, like, how is this possible? It was literally because of the research that LLS and the American Cancer Society and a lot of other folks had done. And so I vowed, when I was diagnosed, that I was going to help do everything I can to raise money. And one of the things that I love most about LLS is that they have patient assistance programs because, as you know, when you're dealing with cancer, most folks think, oh, yeah, you have like medical bills and copays and stuff, but if you don't have someone to drive you to treatment, then that's Ubers. That's Ubers back and forth.
Yeah.
There are just so many unexpected costs, not only while you're going through treatment, but even after treatment. And I can talk about that too, because, even though I was very public about my, my treatment and my diagnosis and other things, there are sometimes health results that crop up, not as a result of the cancer, but it was as a result of the chemo, right? Because the chemo can really do a number on your organs. And so, since then, I have to closely monitor my heart, my lungs, my kidney, everything, because when I did the chemo, there was one of the drugs could really impact your lungs.
Yeah. And
as a result of that medicine, they took me off of it after I was no longer after I was in remission. But I developed a condition called sarcoidosis, which is like a lung disease. When they explained it to me, they said this is what killed Bernie Mac. And I was like, well, maybe that's not the first thing you should tell somebody.
Absolutely.
but
a bad joke, huh?
Yeah, but it is, right. But it's manageable. Like, I don't have to take medicine for it. I just have to monitor it. But the patient assistance programs that LLS have, which is putting money in the pockets of people who are going through treatment and even after, was really the thing that drew me to help them. And so since then, I have created family and friends teams every year, have raised over $40,000. And
absolutely,
one of the things that really sort of struck me when I got more involved with the organization is how white everything was, right? Like, I started following them on social media. I started going to events, and I was like, now in 2013, when the students at Howard decided to pick this organization, one of the reasons why, like I mentioned before, is that this impacts Black people a lot.
Absolutely.
And so you have this large national organization, and I really called them to the floor, and I was like, everything that you all do has a white face on it. And I wasn't asking to be like the Black face, but I said, you all really need to be more representative, because this impacts a lot.
Absolutely.
Like I said, I walked into the center, all I saw was Black people. And so there was something that was not connecting.
Absolutely.
And what they did, they responded and they said, okay, do you want to speak on the National Mall? Do you want to speak at this event? Do you want to speak at that event? So, like you mentioned at the top of our conversation, bro, I have done dozens of media interviews. I've done speeches. And I say I have raised, $40,000 directly. That's like me and my network. But I have been at events where, we were at $1 million collectively.
Wow.
Got up on stage and I spoke, and we were at $3 million after I got done speaking. And I don't take all
Wow.
the credit for that, but because of the impact that it had on me, and because, and I'll just sort of tell you one, quick story. When I went into remission, I, still 33. My uncle called me and told me that one of my favorite cousins, who I think she was 27 at the time, was diagnosed with throat cancer.
Yeah.
And a lot of people saw what I went through, right? They were like, okay, he got diagnosed with cancer and like his cancer is gone. So they projected, what happened to me onto her. Now, at the end of the day, her diagnosis, her cancer, everything was very different from mine.
Right.
I knew and she knew. We had very sort of honest conversations with her. She knew she was going to die. Like, she knew that she probably had, if she was lucky, 2 years, probably, a year. She died about 1.5 years after she was diagnosed. And, that was very difficult for me because, people were calling me and like, were like, she's going to be okay because you're okay.
Right.
And it was, sometimes we're put in a position, I wasn't going to be the bearer of bad news and say like, our cancers are different, the way our bodies respond to the treatment is different. Like all these things are different. So you can't look at me and what happened to me and project that onto her.
Absolutely.
And I remember one of the hardest things that happened to me after I was done with my treatment was I went home, and there was another person in my home church in Alabama that he was dying of cancer. I mean, he was like in hospice.
Wow.
And my pastor asked me to get up and to basically like motivate the church and to basically speak life into him. Right. And I told him I couldn't do that. I told him it would be intellectually dishonest for me, knowing how much I knew about the type of cancer that he had, to get up and say, now I told him I would get up and tell people that they should pray, that they should believe in God, they should believe in this. But like, there's also science, right? And a lot of folks want to separate or put science against God. But I believe that one of the reasons why the medicine for me, can work in 2 months is because, there have been advancements that have been made that allow folks to treat the cancer that I have, but that hasn't been done for every type of cancer, which is part of the reason why we do the work that we do. I know you are, since your diagnosis, like you've been involved as well, like not only doing this, but also raising money and supporting folks in other ways. And I think we're motivated by that, but it's very difficult for me to like look people in the face that have a different diagnosis than I had and say like, I am okay, so you're going to be okay.
Yeah, and no, it's not. That's not an easy, pill to not only swallow but also to project that, because the research is the key.
Right.
Your diagnosis is like another course you have to study and stay in tune with, because, like, for example, and I share this, is that if I didn't stay on top of large B-cell lymphoma, I would have been subjected to radiation from a radiologist, and I would have had heart damage if I didn't stay on top of that. And he pressed me. He was like, no, your doctor said you got to do radiation. So I'm sitting here like, you trying to collect a check? Because clearly, and I literally left my doctor's office. He said, you can't do radiation. And then I go there. And so, like you just said, all we can do is pray. All we can do is, help that person with that diagnosis. And the best way we can is just to support them. But we can't just say like, oh, I survived, so you're going to survive. Because that's not fair. That's not fair. That's not fair.
and look, I could have, the way that I dealt with that publicly with my cousin, I did keep, I was not dishonest with people, but I was positive when I talked about like her journey, right?
Yeah.
When I talked to her one-on-one, our conversations were different because, there was probably a moment that you remember, and I remember my moment where I was like, before I knew that my cancer was treatable, when you hear the diagnosis, no matter how faithful and positive you are, you start to question things like, am I ready to die? Like if I die,
Absolutely.
and so she came to me straight up and was like, I've had conversations with doctors, and I know that I'm gonna die from this, right? Like I know this is what's gonna, like I mentioned before, when someone, people thought I was gonna die from cancer, I was like, no, like, and it wasn't because of my faith, it was because like, doctors come in and they know, what the what the average sort of lifespan for someone who are diagnosed with certain type of cancers are. And so she knew, and because she had that, she was a person of faith too, and she had a piece too about her. Like there were people around her that really rallied around her. But the thing that I appreciated about her, like when you come to terms with it, no matter what it is, and you're a person of faith, it does like lend itself to like the peace that I felt and that she ultimately felt too.
Yeah. So how do you look at mortality now? Now that you what I mean, survived, you've done a lot of good works, and how do you view it now? Because I always say this, I've looked death in the face twice and survived, and that gives me motivation for any other obstacle that comes in my life. But how do you view mortality now?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna be honest with you, bro. Like when I was 8 years old, someone very close to me passed away, and like I saw him the day before he died. He had sickle cell, and he was sick like when I met him, he was sick. So like
right.
So going through such a traumatic situation like that when you're 8 years old kind of like shakes you anyway. But I will say this though, like, for me, because, up to the point where I was diagnosed with cancer, you do feel a little bit invincible. You like, like when you're young and healthy, you're like, look, I can take on the world, like nothing's going to take me out. And I think for me, what cancer did for me was shake my illusion of invincibility, right? Like after that point, like I knew, like, even though I knew after a certain while that I was going to be okay from cancer, because of how quick it happened to me, I always now I am very aware that like I could check out of this, I could check out, tonight.
At any point.
Yeah, at any point. And I think that for me, that's what the diagnosis in that period of my life, it made it more real for me. Like I said, I'd experienced it before, and it was always in the back of my mind. But until it happens to you, like, for me, that's what's real.
Yeah. And so, no, man, we do come to a point where I ask all my guests, and 3 positive deposits. We're here to transform minds and change lives. So what are 3 positive deposits that you can share with anyone that's listening right now on how to approach cancer, deal with cancer, and prosper after cancer?
Yeah, so the first one is very clear to me, and I tell people this wherever I go now. Like, you have to listen to your body. As people who are young and, like I mentioned before, like, relatively invincible, there are a lot of us that we are sick, and because we've always gotten better, we just assume that we will get better.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I used to do before was that I used to have like a little personal sort of system where like I had to be sick for a week before I would go to the doctor. Now, as soon as I like something wrong with me, I'm video time. I'm a FaceTime the doctor, or I'm making an appointment. I'm trying to get
right.
Because you also know this, like the earlier you catch cancer, sometimes really impacts like your prognosis in the long run. One of my friends, his father died of throat cancer literally a week after they diagnosed him, because he went 2 years just thinking his throat was irritated when the cancer was eating his body up, right? And so the first deposit I'll make is please, you don't have to have a medical degree to understand like when something is off with your body. Exactly. So I would just encourage everyone, if you don't have a primary care physician, get one. If something is going on that is not normal with your body, no matter how severe you think it is, because again, that my friend's father, his symptom was like that he had like an irritated throat.
Right.
And what happened is he went in to do like a normal procedure, and when they opened him up, they found cancer everywhere.
Wow.
he was gone a week later. And so, you know, my first deposit is to listen to your body. The second deposit I would say is, and if you are lucky enough to have a job, I mean, we're still, no matter whether people think it or not, we're still in a pandemic. So there are a lot of folks that are still out of work.
Yeah.
If you are lucky enough to have a job that allows you to choose between like a HMO and a PPO, you know, when you're young and you're healthy, you think, oh, I should not pay more for insurance because I won't need it. One of the things that really, really saved me, like, bro, you know, financially, cancer can really, really, really take a toll on you. But I've always chosen the high option whenever I got an insurance, and because of that, I still had to come out of pocket a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I sat down with my employer, and I looked at like how much I would have had to pay if I chose the low option. I mean, and the difference was like them taking $80 out of my check every paycheck or $100 out of my. But the difference was, you know, the lower option, they pay 80% and you have to pay 20%. When I looked at all the costs that I was billed for, like for my treatment, it was north of $400,000. So if I was billed $400,000, if I would have chosen that lower option, I would have still ended up having to pay $80,000, right? And I don't care how well you've done in your life. If somebody had to come to you right now and say, give me $80,000, like, you know, and it's really sad because there are a lot of folks that die because they just cannot afford the treatment. And you know, our system is vicious, and, you know, they're going to get their money. And so I would definitely say, you know, if you have the option and you are in the position to like choose an HMO or a high option, wherever you work, choose it, because, you know, you might not need it, but it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
Absolutely.
And the third thing I would just say is, you know, no matter if you go through something as traumatic as cancer or not, whenever you go through anything where there's a lot of misinformation out there about it, what I would encourage you to do, you know, is to do your best to educate me. This is which is why I love what you're doing, which is when you come on here and you talk candidly about your experience with cancer twice, then if someone else faces that moment, they might face it with a bit more information and knowledge and really hope, even as a result of them listening to you for like 30 or 45 minutes. And so I would just encourage folks that one of the most positive things you can do for them is to provide them with information.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think that, you know, to the extent that you are willing to, that you should educate people to break down those misconceptions. And in doing so, you can really like help people 5, 10, 15 years down the line who might face this get through it a little easier, just as a result of you being so transparent and sharing what you've done. So, brother, I can't thank you enough for inviting me on to share a little story. You know, you are overly generous when you say, like, you know, people know me. Everybody knows who you are, and and I think that you know, my view of you has been like, for me, you know, even though cancer is not something that was easy for you, that I think it's made you a better person, and I think it's probably made me a better person too. And that something positive, so positive, could come out of something so like dark and negative, to me just shows the power of God. And
absolutely.
I really appreciate you for doing what you do.
No, man. And I mean, you know, thank you for those flowers, man. You know, I think that cancer was a blessing both times. And, you know, as this show grows, you know, with folks like you and others that are willing to share and give that education, you know, and give different perspectives, it's only going to make this world a better place, you know. And so I'm grateful to have you as a guest. So if folks want to reach out to you, Marcus, how do we find you? How do they find you?
Yeah, so I'm all the social media. It's my name, like I think on Instagram, it's Marcus A. Ware.
Okay.
Same on Twitter. Like it's just my name. So if you want to follow me on social media, and my email address is the same as marcusaware@gmail.com. So if you want to reach out, please feel free to. I could do whatever I can to help folks. And yeah.
Well, you heard it. You know, Marcus A. Ware, you know, blow up his DMs, holla at him. If you want to definitely get involved with LLS, this man is an advocate for them, and I am as well. But definitely, this man has done great things, worked with the organization prior to and continues to work. And it's just so happy to have you on here. So, if you guys want to tune in, we are on all streaming platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. And of course, please visit our website, www.positivedeposits.org. And as you know, please hit the donation button. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. So we've definitely transformed minds and changed lives. And until then, we are signing off. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, brother.